이제 오늘이죠. 오늘 열리고 있는 저기 한국에서의 한미 공동 컨퍼런스에 이제 주요하게 등장하시는 분들이 이런 분들인데, 그 중에서 이제 제가 요번에 미리 8월 21일 날 불려나간 웨비나는, 그러니까 웹에서 연결된 세미나는 댄 슈나이더와 고든 창입니다. 그래서 여기 흰 박스에 들어있는 이 두 분께 불려나갔고요. 이거가 제가 참 부끄럽게 영어를 버벅거렸음에도 불구하고 이 한국 문제에 굉장히 관심이 많은 로렌스 팩이라는 분이 계십니다. 저랑도 좀 아는데, 이분이 그 한미 양쪽에 걸쳐서 수천 명, 아마 만여 명의 그 메일링 리스트를 운영하실 거예요. 로렌스 팩이 댄 슈나이더랑 고든 창이 백모 불러가지고 그 한국에서의 좌파들의 그 부정선거에 대한 거를 이야기를 가졌다, 이렇게 다 메일링 리스트로 링크까지 다 안내를 해줬어요. 들어가시면 Cpac 라이브에서 이제 어떻게 다뤄지는지 요번에 그 이제 한글로 우리 국문으로 서브타이틀을 붙여가지고 안내를 드리고자 합니다. 자, 그러면은 질감해 주시죠.
Well, we've got two guests who are going to help us understand what could go wrong because it already has gone wrong. We've got Gordon Chang, who is both an ACU board member and a well-known writer and TV commentator from America. And we've got Bang Mao, who is one of the best-known writers, critics, and thought leaders in South Korea. They have studied the Korean elections that took place just in April 15th. And by all accounts, the president, the radical left-wing president of South Korea, stole the election. Bang Mao, could you please tell us what happened?
Yeah, in short, a very sophisticated set of a computer server and QR code and a Huawei firewall and a very sophisticated server-grade ballot counting machine, electronic counting machine. These things were used to, how can I say, fabricated or steal about 7 to 10% of the vote during the universal early voting. It is suspected.
I want to just interrupt you there. 7 to 10% of the vote was stolen in this nationwide election.
It is suspected by a U.S. professor, a very famous doctor, Dr. Walter Bain.
Right. If our viewers are interested, Dr. Walter Bain at the University of Michigan did this work. He doesn't know anything about Korean politics. He doesn't know anything about Korean policy. He is a numbers guy, and he monitors elections all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of elections he's monitored.
That's right.
So he got the data sets from the Korean election, and to his amazement, it was 7 to 10% of the election was stolen.
That's right.
Bang Mao, you mentioned Huawei. Gordon Chang, you are somebody who knows what Huawei is about more than almost anybody else on this planet. Gordon, what did Huawei do? What are they capable of? And maybe we can also start thinking about what happened in Korea and how that might impact the U.S. election.
Yeah. Huawei Technologies is the world's leading maker of telecom equipment and is basically owned by China by 99%, 1% by a private individual. Huawei is China's instrument to dominate 5G, the fifth generation of wireless communications. More important for this purpose, China's used Huawei to surveil others around the world. And in this case, they've not only used it to surveil what was going on in South Korea, they used Huawei technology and servers to steal that 7 to 10% of the vote. So we believe that Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, worked with the Communist Party, worked with perhaps Tencent, which is a private Chinese company, and they worked also with Huawei Technologies. And that's how Beijing was able to develop this software that in the middle of an election changed 7%, 10% of the ballots.
Yeah, so Tencent, most Americans probably don't know that company, but Tencent owns TikTok, right?
Yes, that's right.
Tencent owns WeChat, which President Trump has put under ban. TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is another Chinese company. ByteDance and Tencent are very similar. They are internet giants.
Well, sir, back to the Korean perspective. Why would President Moon Jae-in do this, and how did he do it? How did he work with the Chinese to get this done?
Actually, I don't have a very, concrete evidence. We don't. It is all kind of a suspicion right now. So I have to keep my reservation with regard to that. But still, back in the July of 2019, and I look like a Biden. Sorry, 2019. The head of one of the key member of the ruling party went to Beijing and made a agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, and it's very strange. It is a policy partnership agreement. July 9, 2019 is by that time everybody knows that there's a civilization war between China and U.S. Is going to end up with the victory of U.S. It was very clear to almost everybody. And still, this guy went to Beijing.
And are you referring to Yang Jong-chul? Is he the individual? Well, he is notorious for being very pro-North Korea and very anti-American. So he's the guy that the South Korean president sent to the Chinese Communist Party to work out this deal.
Yes, the ruling party sent him. He is the head of the ruling party's think tank, which is called the Democracy Institute.
So now the Chinese are involved in the Korean elections. They've got their hardware. Gordon, 5G, Huawei. What could go wrong in the U.S. elections here?
Well, what could go wrong is what we saw in South Korea, is that they manipulated electronic voting machines. Now, many U.S. votes are recorded on those electronic voting machines. So, for instance, the last time that I voted, 2016 presidential election, it was on an electronic machine. And what we're concerned about is that these machines, some of them have indirect links with Chinese equipment suppliers. With Beijing perfecting its techniques in South Korea, it could try something else. We worry about mail-in ballots, as you just point out. And by the way, I am from New Jersey. And one thing I'm going to do, Dan, is Lydia and I, my wife, we're going to actually go and get absentee ballots. We're going to fill them in. We're going to deliver them on the spot because we are concerned about election fraud. But sorry for that. But what China could do is, with those electronic machines, which are in New Jersey, they could just change votes like they did in South Korea. Remember, their software to do this in South Korea changed votes in the middle of an election. It figured out which elections, because there were 300 seats up for grabs on April 15th in the National Assembly, they figured out which seats they should try to change, which they could change, and they changed them instantaneously. So if they can do that in South Korea, why can't they do that in the United States? So we've got to be extremely concerned because we know that China's been thinking about our election infrastructure.
Well, Bing Mao,
yes.
We're going to put a picture up on the screen where bundles of ballots were put in like kiosks, voting kiosks in Korea, and every single one of these ballots were voted for the ruling party. Obviously, there was additional voting fraud that didn't relate to high technology. It was just straight rampant fraud. Can you explain how that would have happened in Korea?
You mean, yeah, it is essentially it is a very high-tech electronic kiosk. We Koreans do have a very accurate resident registration. Very, very accurate one, and they are using it, and so anybody can go to one of the polling places, which is about 4,000 all over the country. Mm-hmm. Not to his address, not to the one which is in his address. No, any place. So it is actually a kiosk. Still, it provides you with paper ballots. So it gives you a false feeling that it is a real, conventional, traditional voting. But essentially, it is electronic voting.
Well, in some respects, it actually sounds a little bit like what the New Jersey governor is doing and what other governors here in America are talking about doing. Just sending out, you'll get something in the mail, it's paper, and you can vote it. But what if you've got 5 people in your family and you get 5 ballots? Or what if you're in a house, you've moved into a house and you get a whole bunch of ballots, from other apartment owners in the house? And I mean, Gordon, how are we going to prevent this kind of fraud that we saw in Korea just in April?
Yeah, mail-in ballots are really an invitation for fraud, and especially with what we've seen in prior elections in this country, this is not some theoretical concern. I just want to mention, in South Korea, this was an election for the National Assembly. The National Assembly, in the first instance, gets to approve a constitution. Moon Jae-in is just 3 votes short of being able to get a constitutional amendment through the National Assembly. And the reason why this is important is because if Moon can do what he wants, he probably would do away with the Republic of Korea, South Korea. He'd merge it into North Korea. Because of this fraud, he's only 3 votes short of being able to end the existence of South Korea. That's why this fraud is so consequential. And of course, Dan, November 3, this election is so consequential for the United States. So China clearly has the incentive to change the election results as they did in South Korea, and as I'm sure they're going to try and do in the United States.
Well, we started this segment off explaining that what happened in Korea could be a precursor to what could happen in our own elections. Bing Mao, how are the Korean people responding to all of this evidence of fraud?
Actually, this government is totally controlling every sector of the media, and shamefully, the Korean learned people, the intellectuals, are not strong enough. So, actually, those people like me who are criticizing before the election and after the election, there's a system. Before the election, I criticized the system itself, and after the election, I raised the issue of election rigging. And these people are prosecuted. For me, I'm being prosecuted,
Right.
because they say that I instigated election crime, organized election crime, for criticizing the system.
Right.
And
For asking questions.
So we are being marginalized. Still, there are lawyers, and still there are activists. Still, there are big demonstrations against this election rigging, but it's an uphill struggle.
Well, Bing Mao, I hope that this University of Michigan professor who crunched all the numbers and shows that and I think the language he says is that, well, in fact, I can quote, there are anomalies that strongly suggest the Korean 2020 legislative election was fraudulently manipulated. This is one of America's finest statisticians who specializes in election fraud all over the world. And, it's unequivocal. Something weird happened in Korea. And now you're being prosecuted in a criminal court for saying exactly what this University of Michigan professor is saying.
Yes, that's right. And for warning, this system can be fatally rigged before the election, for warning it.
Yes. Well, one thing we know about the left, whether we're talking about the left in America or we're talking about the left throughout the world, they weaponize the court system against their political opponents. I might have a disagreement with somebody. We can debate. We have an election, and the person who convinces the electorate is supposed to win, and the other person is supposed to lose. But the loser is not supposed to go to jail. Yet we see the left in America trying to criminalize disagreement, just like we see in South Korea and other places.
Yes, it has happened here. I think they are trying to build a Orwellian totalitarian control all over the country throughout all the sectors. I think that Xi Jinping is a inspiration to them.
Well, Bing Mao and Gordon, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We have seen the same sort of thing happening in Hong Kong. The person we think of as the greatest patriot on earth, the greatest freedom fighter on earth, Jimmy Lai, he's now been arrested. He's been imprisoned. He's now out on bail. But there's a serious threat that he'll be taken to China, tortured, imprisoned, and who knows what else. The same fights here in America are the same fights elsewhere. It is about freedom versus the radical left. So as we approach November 3rd, let's keep in mind we have got to fight for freedom. Thank you all. This has been another edition of Cpac Live.
이제 고든창 같은 사람 말하는 거 보세요. 일단 댄 슈나이더도 단정적으로 이거 한국에 부정선거 있었다라고 표현을 하잖아요. 오히려 제가 겁이 나서 제가 그 말 중간에 보면 이거는 전부 그러니까 정황적인 에피소드적 증거들이다. 아직 확정적 결정적 한 방을 우리가 확보하지 못했다. 저는 그렇게 얘기하는데 이 사람들은 그냥 부정선거를 그냥 대놓고 얘기를 합니다. 특히 고든창은 여기에 중국 공산당이 깊게 관계했다. 그리고 얘들은 이런 식으로 전 세계를 다 주물럭거린다. 이렇게 아주 결정적으로 얘기를 합니다. 자, 이렇듯이 이제 그 트럼프 진영이라고 말할 수 있죠. 혹은 트럼프를 앞세운 미국의 자유보수 진영이 한국의 4.15 부정선거에 대해서 뛰어든 겁니다. 오늘 지금 이거 보시고 계시는 동안에 열리고 있는 이제 그 한미 공동 컨퍼런스 그것도 이제 내일 모레면은 제가 이제 그 모든 분량을 전부 서브타이틀을 달아서 올려드릴 텐데, 그러니까 한글 자막을 달아서 올려드릴 텐데 거기서도 보시면은 굉장히 살벌하게 지금 상황을 규정하고 있습니다. 제 생각에 아마도 한반도를 정리할 생각이 있는 것 같습니다. 미중 전쟁을 더 강화 혹은 유지시키면서 한반도를 정리하겠다. 이것이 트럼프 진영의 전략적 그 방향 아닌가 그런 생각이 듭니다.
아래의 구독 버튼을 눌러주세요. 그럼 종 모양이 나옵니다. 그 종 모양을 눌러주시면 새로운 영상들이 알림이 울립니다. 그리고 엄지척 좋아요 버튼을 눌러주세요. 여러분의 구독, 좋아요 버튼은 큰 힘이 됩니다.